Welcome to Hollywood Graveyard, where we set out to remember and celebrate the lives of those who lived to entertain us by visiting their final resting places. Today we're heading back to Forest Lawn Memorial Park in the Hollywood Hills to visit such stars as Naya Rivera, Fred Willard, Joe E. Ross, Fred Berry, and many more. Join us, won't you? Did you recognize that baby-faced kid in the intro sequence? It's yours truly, back behind the camera once again, and the passage of years is evident. With a few more gray hairs in the beard, I can't help but wonder where the years have gone. In the end, it doesn't matter that they're gone. What matters is how they went. And they went spending time with you exploring the graveyards of the world, and I wouldn't have it any other way. After a year with you at the helm in our viewers special, we're back in LA to continue our regular Famous Grave Tour series here. And how about we pick up right where it all began, at Forest Lawn in the Hollywood Hills? Our 6th time exploring these grounds now hosting the famous and the dead, which a century ago hosted the famous and the living as they shot movies among these hills. So come tag along with me, the deer, the ravens, a lizard named Bill, and this pair of ghosts, as we dig deeper into the history of these grounds. If you haven't done so already, be sure to check out our first 5 videos from Forest Lawn Hollywood Hills. Let's begin at a familiar and star-studded section of the cemetery, the Courts of Remembrance. Heading into the first courtyard, we make our way into the Columbarium of Remembrance on the left. On the far wall, we find the niche of actress Rita Schaal. Her best-known television role was as housekeeper Martha Grant in the 60s and 70s series The Ghost and Mrs. Muir. One of her best-known film roles shared a similar title, The Ghost and Mr. Chicken, in which she played Mrs. Maxwell. Other notable films include Mary Poppins as the cook and Picnic. Rita died from emphysema at age 69. Let's continue east into the far courtyard. To the right is the Columbarium of Sacred Trust. Just in on the right we find the niche of actress Michelle Nicastro. She made her Broadway debut in 1983 as Ariadne in the original production of Merlin. She then made her way to Hollywood, where she'd become a familiar face on television in the 80s and 90s, making guest appearances on shows like Full House, Who's the Boss, and Santa Barbara. Perhaps her best-known film role was as the voice of the Swan Princess herself, Princess Odette in 1994's The Swan Princess and its various sequels. Michelle also played Amanda in When Harry Met Sally. The talented singer also released a number of albums in her career. Michelle was just 50 when she died from cancer. Turning north, we head into the Columbarium of Providence, the same room where Rod Steiger is inurned. Correctly pronounced this time. Here too we find the niche of Maxine Elliott Hicks, whose plaque boasts the Queen of Acting on Stage, Screen, and Television. A title well earned perhaps, as if you can believe it, Maxine appeared on screen as early as the 19-teens into the 1990s. She began appearing in silent films in 1913 like The Eternal Mother and The Poor Little Rich Girl. She left acting in 1937 but would return to the screen in the 70s, making appearances on television shows like All in the Family, Growing Pains, and Just the 10 of Us. Maxine lived to be 95. Just to the right, marked by a statue, is the niche of Charles Pierce. He began his career as an actor and radio announcer, but is best known today as a female impersonator. He impersonated stars like Carol Channing and Katharine Hepburn, but his most famous impersonation was as the legendary Bette Davis, who incidentally, and perhaps not coincidentally, rests nearby at the entrance of these courtyards. Described as a male actress, Pierce's entertaining engagements would take him all over the world. He retired from entertaining in the mid-90s, later passing away from cancer and a stroke. He was 72. Turning north, we reach the outer wall of niches. If you saw our Disney special, you'll recall we visited the niche of Art Babbitt here. Resting with Art is his wife, actress Barbara Perry. She began her career as a dancer, including ballet at the Metropolitan Opera, and tap dancing at nightclubs and even the Hollywood Bowl. Barbara would perform on and off Broadway and made her way to films in the 30s and television in the 50s. Barbara played Buddy's wife Pickles on The Dick Van Dyke Show and appeared in other shows like My Three Sons and How I Met Your Mother, performing well into her 90s. She also wrote and performed an award-winning one-woman show, Passionate Ladies. Barbara died from natural causes at age 97. South of the Christus statue is the Sanctuary of Enduring Protection. Here's the crypt of Naya Rivera. Naya was born to shine, modeling and acting from a very young age. As a child, she would make appearances in commercials and on shows like The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, Family Matters, and had a regular role in The Royal Family. Naya's breakout role would come in 2009 when she was cast as Santana Lopez on the popular musical series Glee. She would appear in over 100 episodes, showcasing her singing skills alongside her acting. After Glee, she would land a starring role in Step Up, High Water. But tragedy would strike in 2020, cutting her life and promising career far too short. On July 8th, Naya rented a pontoon boat with her young son for a day out on Lake Piru. When the rental boat was not returned, authorities set out and found Naya's young son alone on the boat. Naya was nowhere to be found. Her son told authorities that they had gone for a swim, but that her mom had disappeared under the water. Naya likely got caught in a rip current, mustering up just enough energy to save her son and push him back in the boat, but not enough to save herself. After an intensive search, her body was discovered 5 days later. Naya was 33. Farther in on the left is the Gordy family room, where rests Anna Gordy Gaye. Fans of Motown will recognize the name Gordy. Anna was the elder sister of Motown founder Berry Gordy. Anna was a record executive in the 1950s, founding her own label called Anna. The label released what is considered the first national Motown hit, Money, That's What I Want.
The best things in life are free. That's what I want.
Anna Records was also known for working with early Motown legends like David Ruffin and Lamont Dozier. In 1961, the Anna label was absorbed into Motown Records. Anna later became a songwriter, known particularly for her work with her husband, Marvin Gaye. Anna passed away just after her 92nd birthday. Let's make our way to the next courtyard south. Here's the grave of Jimmy Bain. He was a Scottish-born bass player, known for playing with the bands Rainbow and Dio with Ronnie James Dio, entombed just feet from here. With Dio, he co-wrote and performed on hits like Rainbow in the Dark.
You've been left on your own, like a rainbow in the dark.
Bain also worked with Thin Lizzy frontman Phil Lynott on his solo albums. In January 2016, Bain was on Def Leppard's Hysteria on the High Seas cruise. He was due to perform, but died in his cabin on January 23rd. He had been battling pneumonia, but posthumously was determined to have had lung cancer. He was 68. Along the wall of crypts before us, we find Buck Henry. The multi-talented Henry found success in many facets of the entertainment world, including writing, directing, and acting. He was nominated for 2 Oscars in his career, for Best Director for Heaven Can Wait, and Best Writing for The Graduate. He would take his writing skills to television, co-creating and writing with Mel Brooks the hit 60s comedy, Get Smart. In front of the camera, you saw him in movies like Catch-22 and Grumpy Old Men, and on TV shows like 30 Rock and Murphy Brown. He's also remembered for having regularly hosted Saturday Night Live in the 70s and 80s. Buck Henry died from a heart attack at age 89. Back to the grounds behind us is the grave of actor and comedian Reynaldo Rey. He launched his career touring the world as a stand-up comedian. From there, he'd find his way into popular comedies of the 90s and 2000s, like Friday, White Men Can't Jump, and Harlem Nights. And he appeared as himself on shows like Match Game and Def Comedy Jam. Reynaldo died from complications of a stroke at age 75. In the next courtyard west is the Columbarium of Valor. High on the wall is the niche of Larry Walters. The casual passerby might be left scratching their head upon reading his epitaph, Lawn Chair Pilot. Larry had always dreamed of flying, but was unable to become a pilot due to poor eyesight. In 1982, he decided to make his dream a reality by attaching dozens of helium-filled weather balloons to his lawn chair. On July 2nd, he strapped himself into his lawn chair, put on a parachute, and brought along essentials like sandwiches and beer, and a pellet gun to pop the balloons. His friends cut the ropes that held him down, and up he went, thousands of feet into the air. Having no control over the flight, he soon drifted into federal airspace around LAX. Using his pellet gun, he shot out some of the balloons and slowly began to descend. His 45-minute flight came to an end when his balloon cables caught in power lines in Long Beach, causing a 20-minute blackout. He was able to make his way to the ground unharmed, but was immediately arrested. When asked why he did it, he replied, "A man just can't sit around." So very true, Larry. His story inspired the 2003 film Danny Deckchair, and may have given the folks behind Up an idea or two. Lawn Chair Larry took his own life at the age of 44. Time to leave the courts behind and make our way around to the north, to Summerland section. Almost all the way to the hedge that divides Forest Lawn and Mount Sinai is the grave of legendary funny man Joe E. Ross. Fans of comedies of the 60s and 70s will immediately recognize Joe E. Ross. He had prominent roles in 2 of the major sitcoms of the era, as Mess Sergeant Ritzik on The Phil Silvers Show, and perhaps most notably co-starring with Fred Gwynne in Car 54 Where Are You, as the bumbling but lovable Officer Tootie.
Now, a lot of you guys have been asking me to look into the various group cemetery plot plans that other brotherhoods and a lot of the precincts have gone into.
Ooh, I can't wait.
In the 70s, Joe would also be known for his voice work for Hanna-Barbera cartoons, like Sergeant Flint in Hong Kong Phooey. Later in his career, he would release comedy albums and perform in nightclubs. In fact, Joe died from a heart attack while performing on stage in Los Angeles. He was 68. Back to the car, let's head west, to a section we've actually never been to before. This is Contentment section. Here's the grave of a singer known mononymously as Vesta. She had an impressive 4-octave range, and had a number of top 10 hits on the R&B charts, like Once Bitten Twice Shy and her signature tune, Congratulations. She would also appear on screen a handful of times, including on the show Sister Sister. Vesta was just 53 when she died from heart disease. Just a little farther up the hill is the grave of Dick Schaal. As an actor, he's best known for his work in television in the 60s through the 80s. He would make multiple appearances on The Mary Tyler Moore Show and its spin-offs, Rhoda and Phyllis. On stage, in the sketch comedy and improv world, Schaal was known as a master of space for his abilities in mime and physical comedy. Richard Schaal lived to be 86. He was the father of actress Wendy Schaal. Let's say a quick hello to Disney Studios across the street.
Hello.
Then move along to our next stop. This is Woodland section, one of the newer sections in the cemetery, a garden-like cremation urn section. Here is the final resting place of metal drummer Frankie Banali. The ambassador of groove is remembered for playing with Quiet Riot during their Metal Health era in the 80s. Metal Health would be the first heavy metal album to reach #1 on the Billboard charts. After Quiet Riot, Banali played drums for Wasp and other bands, including Faster Pussycat. Frankie Banali died from pancreatic cancer at age 68. Next to Frankie is Kelly Asbury. He was an animator and filmmaker known for working on some of the great animated productions of the 90s and 2000s. Among the beloved animated classics he directed are Shrek 2, Spirit, Stallion of the Cimarron, Romeo and Juliet, and Smurfs: The Lost Village. Before directing, he was an artist at Disney, working on films like The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, and The Nightmare Before Christmas. Kelly would also voice characters in the films he made. His final film was Ugly Dolls in 2019. He died from cancer the following year at age 60. Circling back toward the main gates, we reach a familiar section, the Sheltering Hills section. This is the grave of Kent Warner. He was a costume designer for various studios, including MGM. He worked on a number of popular shows like The A-Team and The Rockford Files. When MGM was sold in 1969, Warner was tasked to help catalog important costume items for auction. In doing so, he discovered what is considered the holy grail of Hollywood costume memorabilia, Dorothy's ruby slippers from 1939's The Wizard of Oz. But there wasn't only one pair. In fact, there were several pairs made and used in the film. One was put up for auction. The rest, including the most valuable pair, the pair used for the close-ups, were kept by Warner, along with 2 of Dorothy's dresses. Warner was known for selling costume items. It was the dawn of the Hollywood memorabilia era. He kept the finest pair of ruby slippers for himself, the pride and joy of his collection, his centerpiece. But as his health began to fail due to AIDS, he decided to sell them. They were auctioned off and have passed through several hands since before finding a permanent home in the Academy Museum here in Los Angeles. Kent passed away from complications of AIDS at 41. Making our way around to the northern end of this section, our next stop is right next to the road. Here lies Boris Sagal. As a director, he's known for his work on many of the great television series of the 50s to the 80s. He directed episodes for shows like Mike Hammer, Peter Gunn, The Twilight Zone, Alfred Hitchcock Presents, Dr. Kildare, The Man from U.N.C.L.E., and many more. He'd be nominated for 4 Primetime Emmys for his work. Sagal did direct films as well, including The Omega Man, starring Charlton Heston. In 1981, he was working on the TV film World War III. After filming some aerial shots, Sagal exited the helicopter, but his mind on his work turned the wrong way and walked right into the spinning rear rotor blade. He died from his injuries after hours of emergency surgery. He was 57. Boris was the father of actress Katie Sagal. Continuing west, we reach the western end of Sheltering Hills. Meet Angelo Rossitto. He was born with a form of dwarfism, standing 2'11". But despite his small stature, he'd become big in demand as one of the busiest little people acting in Hollywood, as early as the 1920s when he was discovered by John Barrymore. He played Angelino in Todd Browning's cult classic Freaks in 1932, and Indigo in 1946's Scared to Death. On television, he had a recurring role on H.R. Pufnstuf, and is perhaps best remembered for his role as headstrong Little Mo on Beretta. One of his last major roles was as Master in Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. Angelo died from complications of surgery at age 83. Turning the compass east now, we reach the Enduring Faith section. Here's the grave of Fred Stone. You fans of The Wizard of Oz will be curious to know that Fred here was the very first to portray the Scarecrow in the original 1902 stage production of The Wizard of Oz. Years before that, Fred got his start performing in circuses and minstrel shows, which evolved into vaudeville. He was known for his work with the original Tin Man, David C. Montgomery, in an immensely popular 22-year performing partnership on stage. Fred was particularly known for the physicality of his performances, which would inspire a future Scarecrow, Ray Bolger. Fred made his way to film in the silent era, headlining films like Johnny Get Your Gun. Then when the talkies came around, he found himself starring alongside Katharine Hepburn in Alice Adams and Gary Cooper in The Westerner. Fred Stone lived to be 85. Let's head a little further east in this same section. Near a large tree, we find Hollywood's Superman, Christopher Dennis. For more than 25 years, Christopher Dennis was a fixture on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Dressed as Superman, he would pose for photos with tourists, bringing smiles to millions. His life would be chronicled in a number of docu-series, and he would make appearances as the Man of Steel on shows like Jimmy Kimmel Live, filmed right across the street from his regular haunting grounds on the Walk of Fame. Christopher Dennis bore a striking resemblance to his hero, another Man of Steel, Christopher Reeve. But they would share more than just a name and resemblance. Both Dennis and Reeve died at the age of 52. Dennis found himself homeless in his last years. In November 2019, Dennis crawled into a clothing donation bin in an attempt to retrieve clothing. He became trapped and accidentally suffocated. His final wish was to be buried in his Superman costume. Without the funds to pay for a funeral, fans launched a campaign to raise the money to fulfill his final wish and provide this marker. Across the street south is Revelations section. Stretch out those hamstrings once again because this hill is steep, and we're headed to the tippy top. Here lies Brock Peters. The actor had over 100 credits to his name. Among his best-known film roles are that of wrongfully accused Tom Robinson in 1962's To Kill a Mockingbird, Crown in Porgy and Bess, and Admiral Cartwright in the Star Trek films. The talented actor and singer made a name for himself on stage as well, receiving a Tony nomination and Drama Desk Award for his performance in the Broadway revival of Lost in the Stars. And speaking of being lost in the stars, in addition to the Star Trek films, Brock Peters also played Joseph Sisko on Star Trek Deep Space Nine. He passed away from pancreatic cancer at age 78. Also in Revelation section, farther east is the grave of Esther Phillips. She was a singer known mainly for her R&B vocals, but Esther performed in a variety of genres, including jazz, blues, country, even disco. She rose to prominence in the 50s with R&B hits like Double Crossing Blues, and found success on the charts with the country song Release Me. Esther would receive a Grammy nomination for her single Home is Where the Hatred Is.
Home is where the hatred is.
She also had a major hit in the disco cover of What a Difference a Day Makes in 1975. Long-term drug abuse led to liver and kidney failure at just 48. She was originally buried in a pauper's grave in Compton, before being reinterred here in 1985. Just up the hill a little ways, you'll recall if you saw our previous videos here, is the grave of legendary director George Stevens, who made films like A Place in the Sun and Giant. Resting next to George is his wife, Yvonne Howell. She began appearing in silent comedies in the 20s and had perhaps her biggest successes in 1927, in Fashions for Women and Somewhere in Sonora. After making Working Girls in 1931, she retired from the screen to raise a family. During the war, Yvonne worked as a nurse's aide at army hospitals around Southern California. She lived to be, wow, look at those dates, 104. Next to Yvonne is her mother Alice, also an actress. She was prolific in her output during the silent era, with over 100 credits to her name. Known for her work in Mack Sennett's Keystone comedies, she was sometimes called the Girl Charlie Chaplin, and many regard her as one of the greatest silent film comediennes. At the height of her popularity, she was given her own starring two-reel comedy series. Alice retired from acting at the dawn of the talkies. I've found her birth year listed as 1886, 1888, and 1885 here on her stone. So let's just say she died in her 70s. Southeast of here is Bright Eternity section. Not far in from the road is a composer named Joel Goldsmith. He's best known for his work writing music for television shows. Perhaps most notably, he wrote music and themes for the shows Stargate SG-1 and Stargate Atlantis. He would receive 3 Emmy nominations for his work in the Stargate series. He also wrote music for shows like The Outer Limits and The Untouchables. Joel was the son of Academy Award-winning composer Jerry Goldsmith, and would often work with his father, including on the Star Trek films. Joel was just 54 when he died from cancer. In the opposite end of this section, near the courtyard wall, is the grave of John Witherspoon. The comedic actor is best remembered for his role as Mr. Jones in the Friday trilogy of films in the 90s and early 2000s. On television, he played Lloyd in Black Jesus, Pops on the Wayans Brothers, and voiced Granddad on the Boondocks series. And his epitaph is an allusion to his role in the movie Boomerang. He died from a heart attack at age 77. Let's cross over now to another familiar section, the Courts of Liberty, which celebrates American heritage. Turning right at the George Washington statue, into the next courtyard we find the grave of Paul Winfield. The actor earned acclaim and an Academy Award nomination for his performance as Nathan Lee in the 1972 film Sounder. Other films include Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan and The Terminator. On television, he was nominated for an Emmy for his portrayal of Martin Luther King Jr. and would win an Emmy playing Judge Nance in Picket Fences. Paul Winfield died from a heart attack at age 64. Into the next courtyard west, this is the grave of Ernie Anderson. He was a radio and television personality. In the 60s, as the alter ego known as Goulardi, he hosted Shock Theater, nighttime television screenings of B-horror and sci-fi films. He'd then go on to be known as the voice of ABC. His voice was heard during ABC bumpers and announcing shows like The Carol Burnett Show, The Love Boat, and America's Funniest Home Videos. He also took his narration skills to animated series like The Adventures of Super Mario Bros. 3. Anderson died from cancer at age 73. He is the father of filmmaker Paul Thomas Anderson. Back to the Central Walkway, just feet from Hollywood legend Stan Laurel, we find Ray Collins. His best-known role is listed right here on his marker, that of Lieutenant Tragg, in hundreds of episodes of the crime drama Perry Mason. But this role came near the end of his career. Ray Collins had been very busy in the years leading up to this role. From his teens, Collins performed tirelessly, amassing hundreds of roles on stage, then pioneering the field of radio drama. There he would befriend Orson Welles, later joining his Mercury Theater Company. His feature film debut was in Citizen Kane, considered one of the greatest films ever made. Other films include The Magnificent Ambersons and Touch of Evil. Collins died from emphysema at age 75. Our explorations continue in the next courtyard west. Pop quiz for you Hollywood graveyard enthusiasts. Do you remember who rests here? That's right, original Tonight Show host and comedian Steve Allen rests in this unmarked grave. Next to Steve lies his wife, actress Jayne Meadows. Her film career began in the 40s in films like Song of the Thin Man and Undercurrent. And as television dawned, she found her place there as well, making regular appearances in shows like The Love Boat and Fantasy Island. She'd received 3 Emmy nominations in her career, including for her guest role on Saint Elsewhere. Jayne would also appear and perform frequently with her husband, Steve Allen, on television and on stage. Jayne Meadows lived to be 95. She was the sister of Audrey Meadows of The Honeymooners fame. From the gigantic mosaic, we turn left and take a long walk east. Here lies legendary storyteller John Singleton. He was a writer, director, and producer active in the 90s and 2000s. He's best known for writing and directing 1991's Boys in the Hood. He would be nominated for both Best Writer and Best Director at the Academy Awards for the film. This would make him the first African-American nominated for Best Director. Other films he directed include Shaft, Too Fast, Too Furious, and Four Brothers. He made his mark on television as well, creating the show Snowfall and directing episodes for shows like American Crime Story. John Singleton was just 51 when he died after suffering a stroke. Let's head now to the section across the street west from the Red Church, Murmuring Trees section. This is where we find the grave of actor Ralph Bellamy. He was nominated for an Oscar for his role as Daniel Leeson in 1937's The Awful Truth. 20 years later, he won a Tony Award for his role in the play Sunrise at Campobello as Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Other notable films include His Girl Friday, The Wolf Man, and Trading Places. A few years before his death, Bellamy was awarded an honorary Academy Award for his unique artistry and his distinguished service to the profession of acting. He died from a lung ailment at age 87. Time to hop back in the car and head east to Peaceful Memory section. Our next star kept us laughing for years, Fred Willard. The comedic actor is fondly remembered for his roles in mockumentary films like This Is Spinal Tap, Best in Show, and A Mighty Wind. Other memorable films include the Anchorman series. He would amass over 300 film and television credits over his career, making appearances in just about every major TV comedy in the 80s to the 2000s. He played Hank McDougal on Everybody Loves Raymond, and Frank Dunphy, Phil Dunphy's father on Modern Family. He would be nominated for 5 Emmys for these 2 shows. And his appearance as Shelby Forthright in Wall-E marks the only time to date a human has appeared in a Pixar film with dialogue.
Because at B&L, space is the final frontier.
The beloved funny man died from cardiac arrest at age 86. Further east in this same section, just down the hill, we find Lance Legault. He began his career as Elvis Presley's stunt double and stand-in in many of his films in the 60s, and being a talented musician, would even perform with Elvis. As Lance's acting career grew, he found himself often playing military personnel, especially officers. Perhaps his best-known role is that of Colonel Decker, pursuer of the A-Team in the 1980s series. He also had recurring roles on other popular 80s hits, including as Colonel Green on Magnum P.I. and Alamo Joe Rogan on Werewolf. And with a voice described as 4 octaves lower than God's, excuse me, Lance also did regular voice work, including the character Junior in Home on the Range. Lance died from heart failure at age 77. Our travels through this massive cemetery take us around now to the next section north, Tribute section. Here lies Mickey Jones. As a musician, he played drums with a number of notable acts, including Trini Lopez, Bob Dylan, and Kenny Rogers. He'd play on some 17 gold records. He then shifted his career to acting. You saw him as Pete Bilker on Home Improvement, and Hot Rod Dunham on Justified. His film roles include as the Crooked Mechanic on National Lampoon's Vacation. Jones died from complications of diabetes at age 76. And finally, our last stop of the day is just west in this same section. Here we find the grave of Fred Rerun Berry. He earned his nickname from the character he's best known for playing, that of beret and suspender-wearing Freddie Rerun Stubbs, on the hit 70s sitcom, What's Happening? He delighted audiences not just with his comedic chops, but also his dance skills.
What's happening? Rerun! Everybody, this is Priscilla. Aren't you pretty? Thank you.
By the late 70s, Barry and his rerun character were among the most popular on television. He would reprise the role in the 80s sequel, What's Happening Now? The phrase, hey, 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 here on his marker was one of the catchphrases on What's Happening. By the 90s, he had mostly given up acting, but would return to the screen a few more times, like for the film In the Hood and his final appearance as himself in Dickie Roberts' former child star. Fred Berry was 52 when he died in his home while recovering from a stroke. His grave remained unmarked for over a decade, until this marker was placed a few years back. And that concludes our tour. What are some of your favorite memories of the stars we visited today? Share them in the comments below, and be sure to like, share, and subscribe for more famous grave tours. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next one.